Hi, welcome. My name is Matt, and today we're going to talk about how we can use AI to help you develop a LinkedIn profile to ultimately help you get a job. So I hope you enjoy it. I think it's going to be about 30 to 45 minutes. I'm going to try to use some examples, try to teach you a little bit about AI so you know how that works, teach you how to get set up on LinkedIn. So at the end of this, I'm hoping you can create a really effective LinkedIn profile and using AI as a sort of career counselor on demand at any time to help you with that. So quick background on me and why I'm talking to you. I've had a long career in tech, worked a lot at Apple, recently left Adobe after a long time, spending a lot of time working in AI, managed intern programs at Adobe, scholarship programs, have two kids that are either in school or college or out of college. Have looked for jobs a bunch of times, have hired a lot of people. So I'm going to bring all that experience together, share what I've learned about AI, and hopefully teach you a few things that you'll find helpful in both thinking about yourself and what you've done in a more expansive way, thinking about ways to look for a job, to create a really killer resume, and even to practice for job interviews and follow-up. So with that, let's get started. All right, let's jump right in. So today we're going to talk about navigating the job search with AI and using LinkedIn. So the thing that might help you think about using AI for this is really think about this as having a little career coach in your pocket, right? This is something which is always on, it's wickedly fast, it's just patient, and it's also confidential, so you don't need to worry about what you're telling it. So there are really four main chatbots out there. The one I use a lot, and I'm going to be talking about mostly today, is ChatGPT. The second one is Claude from Anthropic. And there are some things I'll show you today with Claude. It allows you to take in larger documents and synthesize and summarize those. There's also Bing from Microsoft and Bard from Google. And all of these are changing and coming up with new things just about every week. So something I tell you about one being a little bit better today might change next week. And if there's something that's really important to you, I would try a couple different ones because they'll all give you slightly different answers. So the other thing which is important to keep in mind are the differences between what we had before with Google search and still have, right, and generative AI. When you think about Google search, it's sort of like the old card catalog, if anybody remembers what those are. But essentially, if you ask a librarian for a book, she'll send you to a very specific part of the library and you'll pull a book off and you'll get that one book. Google search is like that. You type something in, it gives you a list of different pages that you can go to. You know exactly where it's from, you know what the source is, but it's basically, it takes you to another resource. The difference with generative AI is it's almost like someone read all those books in the library and you're asking that person for information and insight rather than asking it where to go to get that information. So the positive thing is it will give you a really well-formed response that has good information and good knowledge in there. And it also allows you to interact with it in a real chat way. So think about talking to it, again, like this little guidance counselor in your pocket or a really, really smart friend. Ask it conversational data, ask it to clarify, ask it to shorten, tell it you don't understand what it's saying, and you can use that kind of language. Whereas with search, you need to be a little more specific. Okay. The other thing that I would just keep in mind is the role of the resume is not necessarily to land you the final job. What the resume is to make that connection with the person who's the hiring manager or who's reviewing the resume. So yes, you want to make sure that you list the skills and the things that you've done, but you also want to convey who you are as a person, right? What are those characteristics? What are those traits that set you apart from someone else? So because you're relatively young and relatively new in the workforce, you might have one or two jobs. So the thing I would think about is how do you tease out of that experience that thing that makes you special and makes you someone that they want to talk to, right? Because really all you need to do with your resume is get to the point where they're like, huh, David's an interesting person. I want to bring him in and talk to him because he might be a good fit, right? So don't be afraid to express your personality in doing that. So what we're going to go through today are just four general areas. And we're going to talk about how you can use AI to help you identify skills based on your past experience, explore potential careers or jobs, create a profile and a resume. We'll be talking about LinkedIn for the profile. And we'll end with talking about how do you write a cover letter, how do you prepare for an interview, learn about the company or the position you might be going in for, and even do some practice interviews with AI. So let's now just start with talking about experience, right? So when you start thinking about your skills, interests, and experiences, because you probably don't have a lot of traditional experience, think broadly. Think about those things where you've learned something or you've done something that tells a story about yourself. So school and academics are one place, right? You've done things at school. You may have taken leadership roles at clubs or different groups. It could be sports. And I would think about leadership very, very broadly, right? Was there something where if you were the team captain, that's great. But even if you weren't the team captain, right, there might be an event or something that happened where you had to step up and take leadership. And I would also think about like leading your peers and your friends can be a really tricky thing, right? So you can talk about that too. It doesn't need to be if you're the president or if you're the top in the class. Anything where you put yourself forward and you learn something is worth talking about. So we talked about schools, we talked about sports. It could also be personal development. If there's something that you did to learn more about yourself where you took the initiative to lean in, that's a great story. Be sure to tell it. Again, it could happen within your community, within your family, or if you're part of a church, it could be part of that. Also, cultural experiences, travel, exposure to different culture, all of those things make you a more interesting person, and that's worth talking about and putting into your resume. So here's an example that I like to talk about because it's a case where I was working with a student. He was a sophomore down at Santa Clara University, and we were talking. He's like, I don't have a lot of work experience. Over the summer, I did this month-long trip. I was canoeing up in Canada. So I don't have a lot of work experience. So we sat down. He explained what this trip was, where he had done, some of the challenges he had along the way. And we put it into ChatGPT. And we said, based on this story, how can you create an entry for LinkedIn or for a resume that describes what I could have learned along the way of this trip? So what I have on screen is what came back. And basically, this student had gone and prepared a 265-mile solo canoe trip that was 26 days of paddling across Class 3 rapids. So what we tried to do was to say, not just I took this month and went away, but what did you learn, right? So some of the skills that are down there, and let me move myself out of the way, are things like leadership and teamwork, planning, logistics, managing risk, being adaptive and resilient, relying on yourself. So these are all really, really good characteristics that aren't just good for a canoe trip, but are also really important for just about any job that you would take on. So another case, I've talked to students and young people who've said, I don't really have a lot of skills. I don't have a lot of experience. All I did over the summer was to cut lawns or do yard care or something like that. So again, we took that experience, went into ChatGPT, and basically asked it, what could you have learned from doing lawn care or mowing lawns for the summer? And it came back, and I'll show you this in just a minute, but this is just a quick summary. It came back with a number of things that would be relevant to just about any job. So some of those are time management, right? If you're managing multiple lawns and other responsibilities, you've got to figure out how to schedule things and manage your time. There's responsibility. You need to show up at a certain time. You need to treat people a certain way. You need to interact with them, right? You could also talk about billing and customer service, where if you're cutting the lawn, you've got to make sure you collect payment. You may need to give a receipt. You may have run over somebody's shrubbery and have to explain why that happened. And that's sort of customer service because things go wrong in anything that you do. Maybe you had to miss something. Somebody got sick. You've got to work with customers around that. So, and the last thing is physical labor. So you may not be cutting lawns at your new job, but if you can show somebody that you had to cut a lawn when it was either, raining or hot, or you had to cut 3 lawns in a day, something that shows that you've got stamina and you show up when times are tough, right? That same skill could be leveraged in a restaurant or many other places. Let me show you the prompt that we actually used, and then we're going to jump in and actually hop into the tool. So the question that I asked it was, what skills could I, as a high school student, have learned from my summer job of mowing lawns, right? You could have asked that any number of ways. You could have said, I don't think I did much over the summer. All I did was cut lawns. What skills could I have learned? right? So there's nothing special or magical about the way that I put this together, except that to say I explain my situation and I ask it a question, and then it will come back. All right, let's take a look at what that actually would look like within ChatGPT. So if we ask it, what skills could I, as a high school student, have learned from my summer job of cutting lawns? It comes back and it starts giving you first some positive feedback. And it says your summer job, cutting lawns, offers more than just pocket money. It serves as a training ground for life and professional skills. And then it goes through and it gives you about 10 different areas where you develop skills or could have developed skills by cutting lawns. Things like the work ethic, attention to detail. And then, like, let's just take attention to detail, for example. It says a well-cut lawn is a masterpiece of precision. Uneven patches or missed spots can make a big difference in the overall appearance. So then it goes on to explain it some more. Similarly, for time management or customer service or financial literacy, it takes these things and positions them and helps you figure out and think about how you may have developed those different skills. So next, the next logical question is, which of these skills might be good to highlight when applying for a job as a restaurant cashier, for example, right? It then comes back and takes those same skills and says, for example, work ethic, right? Restaurants often get swamped during meal times, requiring everyone to put in a solid effort. Your experience getting up early and working hard at a physically demanding job proves that you have the work ethic to keep up. So it goes through the same thing for attention to detail, customer service, time management, right? During peak hours, for example, for time management, a restaurant cashier juggles multiple tasks like taking orders, processing payments. And then it goes on to say, your experience managing a busy lawn cutting schedule serves as a practical demonstration of your time management skills. So what I like about this is ChatGPT is helping you bridge from the experience you had to the experience that you want to have. So next, you might say, okay, help me draft an entry on a resume that highlights my lawn cutting experience in a way that would look attractive to someone looking to hire for a job like a restaurant cashier. So it then comes back in and it gives you the title of what that could be, lawn maintenance specialist, talks about your responsibilities. So in this case, it's not saying that you actually had a portfolio of 20 clients, right? So maybe you had 5, maybe you had 10, maybe you don't want to say I managed a portfolio of 20, right? That may sound a little stiff for who you are, but it at least gives you an idea of how to define the responsibilities. And if it was me, I would take this and then put it into my own words, right? So what you take away from this is you manage a bunch of customers, which could be clients, depending on what you're going after, handled scheduling, billing, and customer inquiries, maintained equipment, right? Conducted, this says conducted targeted marketing campaigns. That might be a little bit stuffy, but you had to market yourself. You had to go out there and find business. And it goes on with things like achievements and skills, and it gives you some different ways for thinking about those. So next, you might say, help me draft a cover letter for a job as a cashier at Avatar's restaurant in Sausalito. So let's get a little more specific. And it comes up with a pretty good framework. Hiring manager, name of restaurant, address, and I didn't put in any of the details for Avatars, I could have. And it gives you, dear hiring manager, and a 3 or 4, probably 4 or 5 paragraph letter. To me, this letter feels a little bit long, but it contains a lot of the main points. You could then go in if you wanted to and say, please reduce this by half, make it 3 paragraphs, make it shorter, make it less formal. So all kinds of different ways that you could ask the tool to fix this for you. So the next thing I typed in is, hey, good news. I got an interview at Avatar. It's for a cashier's job. And then I put in Avatar describes itself as, and I copied this directly off the website and put it in. And ChatGPT comes back, says, that's fantastic news. Congratulations. It gives you a little bit of background on avatars. And then it says, here's how you can prepare. What's interesting, I didn't even ask it for how I could prepare. I just shared the news. And kind of like a friend or a mentor, it kind of takes that next step and it goes, well, here's what you might want to do. You might want to do some research around the menu, around what the brand means. And in the case of Avatar, they do have a very strong brand. Encourages you to look at customer reviews to get a sense of what people liked and didn't like. Talks about how to prepare for the interview, right? 5 very clear different ways to prepare for the interview. Gives you some ideas of questions to ask. And then I would go back and say, okay, what are some of the questions that they might ask me in an interview? And it kind of breaks it down to general questions, which you should expect. Tell me about yourself. Why do you want to work here? Describe your work experience. and it gives you a little bit of highlight for that. What you could do is actually type in your answers and then ask ChatGPT to evaluate your answers and suggest ways that you might improve your answers. Next, it talks about skill-specific questions, right? Things like, how do you handle a high-stress situation? And again, it guides you a little bit, right? Use this as an opportunity to demonstrate your resilience and stress management skills. Goes through a number of things like that. Then it suggests some scenarios. How would you handle a customer complaint about a wrong order or a dietary restriction not being met? And again, this is not to say that these are definitely the questions you're going to be asked, but more than likely, if you go through and you answer these and you ask it to evaluate your answers, you'll be in a pretty good spot to handle anything that they throw at you. So next thing you might ask is, can you help me think of some insightful questions that you can ask them? You always want to have questions to ask when you go into an interview. So again, it's asking you or suggesting some things here that you might ask about the role, about the team and culture, what's unique about avatars, and then some questions that lead into the future. So anyway, I wanted to show you that as a way you could go from the very top level, kind of, bounce around a little bit throughout, but at the end of this, come up with a pretty good guide for how you define what you did before, how you help understand what the job is, and then actually even prepare for the interview. And you can also ask this after an interview to put some information in on how the interview went and tell it to draft a follow-up text, email, or letter, whichever you wanted. Okay, with that very quick update and background, let's hop into LinkedIn. So why I like LinkedIn. So one, it's really fast, right? It's going to save you a tremendous amount of time from doing the traditional resume and printing it out. It's very, very easy to update. You can hop online. You can add something if you have something new that happened or you decide you want to change something. You can do that in a matter of moments. One of the really nice things is it's very easy to share. If somebody wants to see who you are, is ask for a resume, you can just send them that link. If they do want a PDF or they want a paper printout, there's a way you can download a PDF. You can also print it out from there and it's already nicely formatted. But perhaps the most important thing for me, as you've probably already figured out, is it helps you tell your story. It gives more texture to who you are, which again is really, really critical when you're first starting out. So for all those things, I can't recommend it enough. So let's now hop in and I'll show you a couple samples of what a LinkedIn profile would look like. I'm going to start with my son. I have permission to do it. So let's hop right in. Let's pop in and I will pull up my son's LinkedIn account, Sawyer. So Sawyer, so this is what you get when you load LinkedIn. So you've got a background image, which he's picked as Mount Tam. He's got a photo, which isn't exactly along the lines of what I discussed, but he looks to be happy and presentable. Might be a little bit different. His name, the school he went to, that's the heading. So he doesn't actually have an about section, which is not uncommon for a lot of students, but I do suggest it. The next is the activity section, where he doesn't have a lot of activity. Given his interest, I think he could, and that would probably help him. What he's done a nice job of here is the experience section, and we did use ChatGPT to look through this and talk about what are those skills that he could have developed. So he basically had two jobs at places that you may know. One is Hookfish here in Tam Junction, and the other is Tamalpais. He's got his education here. So Parsons, which is where he transferred to, did a year at UC Santa Cruz and went to TAM. Skills, he has one in there as customer service, which arguably he could have more. If I had worked with him, I could endorse that, which again is one of the recommendations that we'll talk about later. He did have a publication section. He worked at the TAM newspaper. So he has one. I know he has other things that he's written, so he might want to consider putting those in. Any honors and awards, he got one. For JV Most Valuable Runner. Languages, he put that in. Organizations, he did some mentoring and volunteering for that. And then he has, interest, and we'll talk about these later. So these are things that you feel affiliated with or you're interested in. It tells a little bit more about who you are. One thing that he's done, he's got, we have 4 people in common, but it's got 114 connections, which is actually better than I would have thought. So that means that he has actively reached out to 114 people to make connections. So they see what he's doing, he sees what they're doing. And it's a nice way to kind of, in an unobtrusive way, to stay in touch with a lot of people. Okay, enough about picking on my son. So the first section, right, there's the headline section. And for a lot of students, it just has the name and the college and perhaps what they're studying. In this case, right, this may be a little bit much, but it gives you an idea of where you can go with it. The next one, probably the most important part of LinkedIn, is your About section. And this is the one that is read the most frequently. The general guidance is to keep it tight and concise so somebody can read it quickly, get an overview of who you are. I'm also going to keep coming back to stressing the need to demonstrate your personality, the traits, and who you are. And this comes back to the fact that people don't hire resumes, they hire other people. So in that, show those things that make you different, show those things that make you stand out, something that will make a connection with a hiring manager or the person who's at the other end of the resume. Some of the things that I've looked for as a hiring manager and some of the things that stand out to me are examples of, and I put them in 3 loose buckets. And I'm not saying you just pull these off and use them, but if any of these connect with who you are and what's important to you, like put that in there. So it might be, curiosity or humor, connection, or taking initiative. It might be teamwork and collaboration, if that's something which is important to you, if you love working with other people. Or it might be, risk-taking, courage. What do I have back there? Grit. So the whole issue of grit and resilience is also something very important for what hiring managers are looking for. The other one, which comes up, is your profile photo. The power of Instagram and TikTok shows this. I mean, people are drawn to other people. They're drawn to the physical face. So this is not the time to show your artistic breadth. There are other ways to do that. So for the profile photo, what you want to do is come across as somebody who you would want to work with, who would be, a sort of an ideal employee. So in this case, the guidance is look directly into the camera and smile. Right? People like it when you're smiling. It shows that you can connect with other people. Use a plain background. Don't have your best friends in there. Don't have your pets. Don't have your latest vacation in there. Just keep it streamlined so that you are the center of attention. And the third one is, have your face fill the majority of the screen. Right? So don't have it be like a shot where your full body is shown and you're in the distance. Have somebody see your face, have them see your smile, and show that humanity that you're bringing to it. On the experience side of things, we've talked about this a little bit. So highlight the best experience that you have, right? It may be internships, and it doesn't need to be an internship for a full summer. If there's something that you did for a week or two, and there was something about that either you learned or you accomplished or you changed where you were, highlight it, right? Volunteering. If you had a long volunteering stint, by all means include that. If you had an afternoon at the soup kitchen or some other volunteering event, put that in, especially if you can tell the story of why it was important to you. So again, it's all in that storytelling. On-campus and off-campus leadership experiences, if you have any of that, by all means, put it in. Education. So, obviously the high school you went to, if you did, if you got great grades, right? If you had like the 4.0 or you were the valedictorian, you're going to put that in. But just by stats, most of us were not the valedictorian. I certainly never was. And if you have a great grade point average, that's great. Or if you took AP classes or anything that shows that you went above and beyond or took initiative, put that in. I would also say if there's a paper that you did or a project that you're particularly proud of or where you learned a lot, put that in, right? So it's telling that story of who you are and showing that you take initiative and you've sort of go above and beyond in a couple of areas. If you were part of a club, even if it's a small club, especially if it's a club or something that you started, I would put that in. Same thing for volunteering. And on all these things, right, highlight the skills that you gained. If the organization or the people that you were working with benefit in some ways, put that in. If there are any specific incidents that you can point to that kind of make that more personal, what it meant for the impact you had on yourself and other people. The other thing that comes up with LinkedIn are activities. So this is a chance not just to show what you've done, but to show what your interests are and to connect with other people. So you can follow people on LinkedIn, you can connect to people on LinkedIn, you can have a list of like your favorite books or authors or movies. So these are all ways of what I kind of see as adding more texture to who you are, right? And you never know, right? If I'm a hiring manager and if I see that you've shared a common movie or a common book, that gives us something to talk about. So an example that I like to use is early on in my career, I got an email from a guy who I didn't know. He went to the same school that I did, and his resume wasn't particularly strong. I was working for Apple at the time, and probably on his resume alone, he wouldn't have gotten an interview. But one of the things that he called out was the fact that he had just finished a bike trip from London down to India. He ended up getting sick in India and had to be, I think, airlifted out. But the fact that he took that bike trip that far was fascinating. So I went to the guy who I was working for, who was also a cyclist, and I basically said, this guy has a decent resume. It's probably not the best, but he's done this amazing bike trip. We have to at least have lunch with him and talk to him. So based on that, we had lunch. He was an incredible candidate, right? He may not have been like the top academically, but he had a resilience and a sense of humor that came from all the setbacks he had on this trip. And he was just an amazing guy. We hired him and he's had a great career both at Apple and then later on in tech. So that's just to say that you never know what's going to resonate with somebody who's on the other end. Put it out there, put your best self forward, and you'll be surprised, pleasantly surprised, I hope, with what happens. Here's the other part that comes up that you can do on LinkedIn. And this comes up sometimes if you need an internship, if you're applying for a scholarship, and for some jobs, right, where you need to ask for recommendations. Frequently, your potential employer will say, do you have a reference? Do you have a recommendation? There's a whole process of, you should always have those people who will speak on your behalf, even as you get older, right? There are still people who say, who should I talk to who can give a reference? Let's face it, it's hard to ask somebody for a reference. It's awkward. So LinkedIn has the ability to ask for a reference in there, and you can put a note in. So one of the things that I want to show is how you might do that. And I have used this before with other students to kind of go in and say, I need a letter of recommendation. So if you're a freshman, for example, at a large university, right? If you want to transfer schools, that was my son's experience. So your professor doesn't really know you that well, right? So they might have some experience with you, but they don't know enough to write a deep recommendation, but they will do it. So what you need to do is provide as much context, a nice polite letter, give them some specific information, and make sure you get that in their queue. So with ChatGPT, you can ask it to help you do that, and it will make sure that you have all the key bits of information. And I'll show you that in just a second. So here's the example of how you might want to ask a professor that you don't know very well for a recommendation. And this starts off by saying, acknowledging that requesting a recommendation from a professor that you don't know well can be a delicate task. Here's the straightforward approach. So it gives you sort of an overview of how to go about it, and it provides an example text. So in some cases that I don't fully know why, ChatGPT puts this like in a code format. So you can copy this and put it into your, into a document or into an email. But you'll see there are certain things in brackets like your name, briefly describe your future plans, so the professor knows what to write, because basically you need to give the professor some background and remind him or her who you are and what you're about. So I went through and I did that. So I said, here's the update. So I went in and I said, my name is Matt in your Paleontology 101 class during the fall of 2023. And I went through and answered the questions that it asked. So then it comes back and it says, Dear Professor Iqbar, I hope this email finds you well. My name is Matt, blah, blah, blah. And it provides that framework. I would not ever just take this without looking at it. I would take it and I would read it and I would modify it to make it me. The other thing I would always change is ChatGPT always comes up with saying, I hope this email finds you well. So that's a real tell that the thing is created by ChatGPT. So I would take that out. And usually at the end, it will say something like, in conclusion. I would also take that out. And it's in there because that's probably the most common line that people use in an email, but it's also the one that ChatGPT spits out now. So I would be very careful of that. So anyways, I hope that's helpful. We talked about some of these interests in sports, the same kind of thing, right? If you've played on a team sport, that's really important. There are many hiring managers and companies that look for people that have played team sports. And the reason for this, if you've played team sports, are obvious. You learn resilience, you learn teamwork, you learn how to be assertive when you need to, but also let other people take the lead, Most of us, when we started off at sports, started off, at the bottom and not very good, worked our way up, possibly to captain or leadership teams in that sport later on. So you sort of learn how to work with people really well. So if that's part of your background, right? And if you're one of these people and if you are playing competitive sports, that means a lot of times over the summer you're having to train. You may not have had as much time to have jobs. So I would include that. The other thing we didn't talk about was, there are a lot of folks who don't have the luxury of getting a job because they have to look after either aging parents or probably more frequently younger siblings. So if that's the case, that's super valuable too. So again, I would go into ChatGPT and ask it, what things could I have possibly learned by looking after my younger siblings in the summer? And it will come back, much like it did with the lawn cutting example, it will do that for you. Same thing if you're a gamer, right? So I'm not saying that you did, but I'm sure there's somebody who's going to watch this who spent a very large part of their summer playing games, or on online games. And if you go in and you say, what skills could I have learned from playing online computer games? And you can even name the game that you play, help me understand how I would present that to an employer. And it will come back and it will talk about things like strategy and some computer skills and teamwork, depending on the game. So again, just another way of really mining your background and your interest to try to figure out where there's a good story. So to wrap this up a little bit, let's take that first resume that we looked at, run that through one of the tools. This time we'll use Claude 2 to give us some feedback on the resume. And this will be a resume that we created in LinkedIn and that we downloaded through the PDF and then fed that back into the tool. So if you recall earlier, I said that you could export your resume from your LinkedIn profile to a PDF that's formatted. So that's what we've done here. So this took most of, but not quite all of the information from Sawyer's resume and created a PDF with it, right? Name, where he is, experience, comes down, lists education, lists a few of the other highlights over here on the left. Maybe able to modify the format a little bit, I'm actually not sure. And it also has this LinkedIn profile where they could go to get more information. So this is what we're taking as a starting point, and we're now going to put this into Claude 2. Now we're in Anthropic's Claude 2. So right here is the resume that I just showed you that I uploaded. And then I ask it, and there's a little button, which you can see right here at the bottom, where you just click that and you can upload up to 5 different files. So the prompt I gave it was act as a college counselor experienced in advising students on resumes and developing LinkedIn profiles, analyze this profile, and provide suggestions for improving. So 2 comments here. One is when you're using these tools, you want to tell it what you want it to do and who you want it to be. So in this case, I didn't just say act as some rando person. I said act as a college counselor experienced in these areas. What do I want it to do? I want it to analyze the profile and provide suggestions. Really, really important when you're working with these tools on anything. So it came back and it said, here are some suggestions for improving the resume and LinkedIn profile. Started with the resume. It gave me some obvious things around a professional summary, which was missing. Expand the work experience to quantify the accomplishments and describe the impact. Consider adding a skills section. So then under LinkedIn specific, it went through each of the different areas that we had talked about before, or many of them, and started giving me some more suggestions, which frankly, I didn't find were all that helpful. So in the spirit of the chat, I came back and said, can you provide more detailed guidance and suggestions for the LinkedIn section? I could have also asked it for examples. And then it said, here are some more specific tips to improve. And it went through many of the things that we discussed earlier: the photo, the headline, the summary, experience, right? In these cases, it gave us some examples, but it didn't, I guess the takeaway from this is not to use these things specifically or exactly as it said, but to use it as directional, and maybe it'll trigger an idea. You'll take some of it, most of it you might not take. But again, it's just to kind of help provide some feedback and get you to think a little more deeply about the resume. Also talks about projects and skills and the education section. So again, the recommendations, it says get 2 or 3 recommendations from managers, professors, or others who can endorse your achievements. So similar to what you just heard me say for 20 minutes, and you could have done it here in 30 seconds. So that's really the power. You put your resume in, it comes back specific to you. And if you had recommendations, maybe it would have gone in and given you a deeper dive into those different recommendations. And then the other thing which I frequently ask for anything that I'm doing with these is, do you have any other advice or any other feedback for me? And then it came back and says, Sure, here are some additional tips that I would recommend to strengthen your professional profile. So it talks about, you could build a portfolio website to showcase your work, start networking, gives you some suggestions on that, do informational interviews, get involved on campus. So again, if there were one or two of these that really resonated with you, you could go in again and say, how would I do that? What are the first 5 things I should do to get started? Again, I know I'm repeating myself with this, but use that chat capability, ask it to do more, ask it to clarify, ask it to expand. Okay, that's what we have for this section. That was a lot, and we went through it really quickly. So hopefully you got something out of it. What I wanted to take you through was a way to describe your experiences more fully, to use AI to help explore some of those things and maybe find some new words and new ways of doing it. Help you get started with LinkedIn so you can understand how it works, how you might use the different sections, how you might use AI to help you figure out what to put in those sections. Also to understand how to use AI to help explore a job, either a career or a particular role. That could be using it to think about what a practice interview would look like, what an employer or a hiring manager might be looking for. Also wanted to show you how you could use it to create letters, whether it's a cover letter or a follow-up letter or a letter asking a professor or teacher for a recommendation or anyone for a recommendation. And I think that practice interview section that we talked about at the end is also really helpful. So you can fine tune that and play with it a little bit. And throughout that, I wanted to teach you a little something about how to actually use these tools, right? Mostly we talked about ChatGPT, but also with Claude. And again, just to stress there, 2 things, I guess, to leave on. One is really push that chat part of the chat bots, right? Ask them questions, ask them to refine all the things we talked about. And the last thing about how you express yourself is remember, that you're being hired not by a machine, but by another person. So really what you want your resume and your profile to do is to tell that story of who you are, right? Of what's special about you, of why they would want to have you as part of their team. So hope you got something out of this. I enjoyed our time together. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Feel free to email me. I would love to hear from you, hear what worked, hear what didn't work, or any questions that you might have. Thank you.